right, hi everyone. My name is Nick Weiss, and as that lovely introduction said, I am a associate and business litigation attorney at the Gertsburg Law Firm. I got into the Ohio's medical marijuana law and advising businesses and other individuals a little more than a year ago, so I'm pretty late to the game. But since then, have been getting involved on advising as to the new licensing processes, getting dispensaries up and running for the next round of licenses. And I've also been part of the recent efforts to combat the Ohio Board of Pharmacy's recent decision regarding CBD. So that's my background as it comes to marijuana law in Ohio. In front of you is a packet full of information. Really only two of those sheets are going to be relevant to what we're talking about today. One is a cut and paste of the application scorecards that should be front and center there for cultivators, for processors, and for dispensaries in Ohio. And we're going to be talking about those scorecards, what they mean for getting into the business on each of those levels. And if you take nothing else away from the presentation, it should be, how do these scorecards work? How is this going to impact the ability of a business or a person to obtain a license to cultivate, to process, or to dispense medical marijuana? And if you really take nothing else away from this, this is probably the most important slide in the whole deck, which is all of the information that you're going to need if you're an attorney to competently advise clients on how to obtain their licenses, how to maintain their licenses. And if you're a business owner or an individual looking to get into the business, this is probably the most important part too. This is going to be your Bible. The revised chapter and the administrative code that outlines step by step, how you have to run this business. I also highly recommend, if you aren't already signed up, that you go to the Ohio Medical Marijuana Control Program's website and sign up for their email blasts. That's really the best way to keep up to date and in touch for any kind of new update for Ohio's medical marijuana. And if you're more interested in just the policy level generally, there's a really excellent course that is being taught at Vanderbilt that updates pretty regularly, especially as it relates to marijuana on the federal level. So I want to get that out of the way first so that you can get this down, and if you have any other questions that I can't answer today, it's probably here. I know most of the people here are attorneys who are going to be advising medical marijuana businesses or auxiliary businesses. So let's get this out of the way first. Yes, you can do that. This was not always clear, and they had to update the rules of professional conduct for House Bill 523 to accommodate this. And beforehand, there was an opinion that had been set out saying, no, it's actually illegal to help anyone in the lawful Ohio medical marijuana industry operate as a business. So if anyone was worried about that, if you're talking to your firm, if you're worried about stepping into the area about whether this breaches any kind of rules of ethics, don't worry about it. For the scope of this presentation, we're going to be talking about building solid foundations for a medical marijuana business, but it's going to be limited to cultivators, to processors, and to dispensaries. I'm not going to be talking about any of the testing sites. That is a whole other set of rules and regulations. You could do another hour and a half just on that. And I think that most of the people who are getting in on this are not pursuing that avenue for getting in the medical marijuana side. It's also not going to be talking about any of the auxiliary businesses. I'm happy to talk with you after the presentation on that. But so for the packagers and for the people who are doing the transportation and people who are doing the security side of this, we're going to be talking about those regulations, but this is not going to be advice for those people who are providing those third-party services. This is just going to be for those getting involved as a cultivator, processor, or as a dispensary. Okay. Now, getting started, I'm going to talk about cultivators most, and that is because overall the requirements, and you're going to see this on your application scorecards, for the cultivator and the processors mirror one another. I'm going to, when there are differences, I'm going to point them out in the scope of this presentation, but mostly they are either identical or substantially similar. And we're going to get a little bit into the dispensaries because they're their own thing and have their own set of regulations. And I know I already got a question out in the hallway about this, so we're going to spend a little more time about that as well. So let's start with the cultivators. For those of you who are not familiar, we've got two types of cultivators that you can apply for, a level 1 and a level 2 type cultivator, and they are distinguished by the amount of square footage that they're allowed to grow in. Level 1 is anything up to 25,000 square feet. Level 2 is anything up to 3,000 square footage. That's not a lot of space. And so when you are advising your client about this, or if you yourself are looking into this, just be prepared to advise them really the limitations that they're going to be under as a level 2 cultivator. Although, and we're going to talk about this, the barriers to entry as a level 2 cultivator, particularly when it comes to finances, are substantially lessened. So there are pros and cons there. And that starts with our application fee, just getting into the door. We're not talking about the amount of funds that you have on hand. We're not talking about your background. We're not talking about anything. Just to ask, hey, can I get a provisional license? You're going to need $20,000 as a level 1. You're going to need $2,000 as a level 2. These applications are pretty extensive. We're going to be talking about that. And this is a way not only to cover that first administrative cost, but also to weed out some of the less serious applicants. Okay, so how do you, we're not going to go through all of the rules. We're going to go through some of the big ones and through some of the provisions in the license application that have tripped people up. So the first set of licenses, we have are pretty straightforward. Legal name is the applicant, type of the organization. You need, if it's a business, and most of them are, you're going to need to show that it's duly authorized with the Secretary of State. Provide an organizational chart, and provide any kind of criminal records check. I want to talk about those last two provisions that are there. The organizational chart isn't such a big deal, but it's kind of, it shows, it's a start as to how invasive this process is going to be, particularly for the investors that you have, particularly for the board members that you have, and particularly for the officers you have. There's going to be an in-depth financial check, background check of basically anyone who is associated with your application. And that sounds reasonable and it's good, but that also includes this criminal background check. And we already know of at least one client who had their application bumped because they did not adequately disclose all of the relevant criminal background on some of their applicants, even some of their low-level members of their board. Whether it's the Board of Commerce or the Board of Pharmacy, they will find this information out. And so when you're advising your clients and you're advising their investors and everyone else, just make sure to stress as much as you can the importance of this, because failing to disclose this or having some kind of disqualifying criminal background is basically an instant bounce. Okay. The other portion of this that I want to talk about is the location, because this is the next step in that first business and operations plan. You have to, at the time of your application, establish, and this is for both cultivators and for processors, that you can actually operate there. It can't be speculative. You have to provide actual evidence of your either ownership of the building or your ability to lease from the building. And this is a little bit different, and we'll talk about this as we get to the dispensaries. But that's an even higher burden for them. Not only do you have to have that kind of proof to show that you own the location, but you also have an affidavit if you're renting from the person who's allowing you to have that. Finally, the thing you need to present here, you need to physically show that your cultivator, your processor, your dispensary is not in a prohibited zone. This is pretty easy. A lot of the people who provide these make it literally take Google Maps and draw circles. It's just not a huge burden, but you have to provide this. And we'll get into what a prohibited area is in a little bit. This is an example that we pulled from Gertsburg, Ohio LLC, who I'm going to draw from a lot on this just because they were one of the applicants that didn't redact many of their documents. Over the course of the application, you have discretion to redact certain confidential information. Gertsburg didn't do that for a lot of them, and so we'll just be using them as an example. And that's another point that I should have brought up at the beginning. When you're going to Ohio's medical marijuana program, you don't have to reinvent the wheel on this. All of the applications, with the exceptions of those redacted portions or those portions where they've asked for certain intellectual property to not be disclosed, are public record, and they're actually on the site. You don't have to go through every single step of this and figure out, okay, what is this supposed to look like? You can draw from successful examples. Buckeye Relief, who was our highest scoring cultivator one with 178 points, has a really excellent application. If you're representing a cultivator, or if you are looking to get into the cultivation side, you can go there and see how it's done. You can take a lot of their language, take a lot of their processes. And I recommend you do that. Not only is that going to save you time, it's going to save your client time, but you already know what works. Okay. The other big part of your business plan, and this will get you a lot of points, and we talked about this out in the hallway with one individual that came up with you, is past experience in the marijuana industry. Now, on its face, this seems a little unfair because the marijuana industry has not existed in Ohio, but nonetheless, this is a very important point and one that you're really going to have to hit in the course of your application. Who do you have that actually has expertise in this field? And if you don't have someone that has expertise in this field or a background, then you're going to need to get one, or you're going to lose out to someone who does have that. If you are looking for someone who has that expertise, there are certain organizations, I'm going to refer to them a few times over the course of the presentation. I highly recommend that you reach out to the Cleveland School of Cannabis, where I'm also an instructor, just in the interest of full disclosure. Also the recently created Cannabis Chamber of Commerce